Hi, I'm Rajiv, and today I'm going to show you how I make a Hindu flower garland. Flower garlands are a very significant part of my culture. In Hindu weddings, flower garlands are exchanged by the bride and groom. In Hindu funerals, flower garlands are put on the deceased before you say goodbye. When we go to the Hindu temple, offerings are made to the divine, to the statues, in the form of fruit and broken coconuts, but also flower garlands. And this is a practice that goes back thousands and thousands of years. It is a beautiful, beautiful craft of taking flowers and tying them together to create a chain, basically. And I love that this is something with origins that go back millennia. As a child growing up and witnessing the rituals in my culture and seeing flower garlands, I always wondered how they were made and who made them. And I discovered when I was a kid that most of the flower garlands I was seeing at the Hindu temple were made by the wives of the priests. And as I grew up and started being introduced to a wider base of my family, it was when I went overseas and visited relatives in England that I discovered that a couple of them actually knew how to make flower garlands. And I was so motivated to learn from them. So my one relative, her name is Deepa, and I call her Deepaka. Akka means older sister in Tamil. Deepaka, when I was visiting her in Nottingham, she told me that she would show me how to make these flower garlands. And we went out to the grocery store, bought some mums. Most of the flower garlands are made with mums, but they also make garlands out of any flower. Carnations, roses, and all kinds of tropical flowers that are native to India. But mums are very easy to use for our flower garlands. So we went out and got some mums, and then we sat on the living room floor, and she showed me how to do it. I tried. It wasn't great. She said, okay, now take it all apart and do it again. I did it again. It was better. And then she said, now take it all apart and do it a third time. And then she said, go home and keep doing it so you don't forget. And the more you do it, the better you'll get. So that was about 8 or 9 years ago. And I've been making garlands ever since. And this is something that I am so happy I know how to do, because I love my culture so much. I absolutely love the religion that I was born into, Hinduism. There is such a fascinating history with Hinduism. And the more I educated myself on what everything represented, the more in love I fell with this religion. So practicing it and taking part in the ritual is something that's very important to me. One of the oldest goddesses in Hinduism is Saraswati, and Saraswati in Sanskrit means that which flows. And Saraswati is the goddess of the arts and learning. I know on the surface that it might seem like, oh, there's a goddess that represents art and learning, and that's what you're worshiping, but it's so much deeper than that. This is just an idea. And she is just a representation of that idea. The idea that art and music and creativity and knowledge is not something that stays still. It is that which flows. She's often likened to a river. It's something that is always moving and that has to flow evenly. And the beauty of this is as I focus more on every practice, playing the piano, playing the harp, watercolor, pottery, all of my teachers are saying the same thing. You need to connect everything. It needs to be fluid. It needs to flow. When Marcelo is showing me how to put a wash down on a piece of paper for watercolor, there can't be streaks. It needs to all be smooth. When Caroline is telling me that the left hand of my Chopin nocturne sounds choppy, she says it's because you're not connecting it. You need to roll your left hand as you're playing those 3 notes. So when I sit down in the morning and I meditate and I chant in Sanskrit, Om Aim Saraswatye Namaha, what I'm saying is, oh, greetings to that which flows. Although I'm focusing on this idea of this goddess, what I'm really focusing on is what is inside of me, the creativity and the fluidness that I want to bring into my life. And as I concentrate on that, it gets better. So when we make a garland and we take it to the temple and we put it on Vishnu, or we put it on Saraswati, or we put it on Ganesh, the overcomer of obstacles, what we're really doing is we're really focusing on what we need to fix and work on inside ourselves, the obstacles that we need to get over inside ourselves. And when I'm making a garland like this, that is what's going through my mind. And I think that that's so beautiful. When I lost my mom and I knew that we had to put garlands on her body and I couldn't look at her body in the casket, I made 4 garlands in the basement. And as I sat there and I strung these flowers together, I thought of my life with my mom. And knowing that this practice is so old and ancient was, I think, a wonderful way of saying goodbye. So, let's get to it. I have 4 bunches of mums here, and I like to pick different colors. So I plan it out in my head. What colors do I want to combine together when I'm making a garland? And I picked out dark purple, light purple, and white. And when you're picking out the different flower colors, you want to try to make sure that the flower heads are the same size, and that is important later on. So you get your flowers, and again, I have 4 bunches of flowers here. The next step is to cut the heads off of the stems, and you cut off about 1.5 inches or 2 inches of the stem, because that's what you're going to use to actually tie the flowers together with string. And I create separate piles with the separate colors. What I love about this is that these garlands are made with completely natural materials that will disintegrate. So in these Hindu practices, sometimes the garlands are put onto things and then they're taken to a river, and then the garland is put into the river, and knowing that everything will just eventually get caught on a bank somewhere and fall apart and disintegrate and go back to the earth. When I do this, I usually play some kind of sacred Hindu music, so mantras or Carnatic music, which is classical South Indian music. It's usually, the lyrics are always something associated with deities and the divine, and they are in the compositions composed in the 17th to 19th centuries. They're often in Tamil or Sanskrit or Telugu. And I love that music so much. When people ask me what kind of music I listen to, I'm like, how do I actually describe this to them? My mom loved Carnatic music, and when she was very young, she started learning how to play the veena, which is the South Indian version of a sitar. And it was my mom that planted this seed, or the metaphor that's often used in Hinduism is that a lamp was lit. That in your life, when something comes into your life that's sacred, like yoga or like good classical music, it's a lamp. The lamp is lit. Someone who inspires it in your life has lit a lamp, and it's like bringing light to a dark place. And what they say is the beauty of this is once the lamp is lit, it can never be extinguished. It will always burn. And if you add fuel to that lamp, the light will grow brighter. So if you focus on something and dedicate time to practicing it, the light will get brighter. But if you don't, the lamp will still stay lit. It's still there. The wonderful thing is that it will never be extinguished. I make these garlands often for the statue of Saraswati, or for the picture of my mom that I have in my apartment. on days that are marked on the Hindu calendar where you're supposed to honor your loved ones that are passed away. There are certain days where you honor your mother if you've lost your mother, or you honor your father if you've lost your father. On those days, I make a garland and hang it on the picture of my mom. And when I do that, the garland is small. But on certain days of the year, when I actually go to the Hindu temple, when I'm in Toronto, I go to the Hindu temple that I would visit as a child in Richmond Hill. And when I'm in New York, I go to the Flushing Temple in Queens. I make a very big garland for Vishnu. Vishnu is Big Daddy. And Vishnu represents order in the universe. So I make a garland that's sometimes 6 or 8 feet long. And when I make that garland, it usually takes about 3 hours, 3 or 4 hours. And I do it on the floor. So I'm kneeling on the floor and I make the garland that way. There's something very special about seeing those statues bathed ritually. And this really does go back thousands of years. The fascinating thing to me is that those practices that are still done in these Hindu temples are contemporary to ancient Egypt. In ancient Egypt, they had very similar temple worship with stone or bronze statues that they would dress and bathe and clothe. And although the ancient Egyptian religion is extinct, this is still done in Hindu temples all over the world, and I love that. I love that I belong to something that's so old, many thousands of years old. And the thing about taking a garland to the temple and then seeing it put on the statue after it has been bathed in milk and honey and turmeric is that I feel like I'm participating. Okay. I have my white flowers, I have my dark purple flowers, and I have my light purple flowers. And the next thing I do is I just divide them into roughly 2 piles. So I've divided everything into 2 piles because the way you make these garlands is in 2 parts so that they're even. One side and then another side. And that the stripes are even. So to control that, or to ensure that that happens, you make 2 piles. To make the garland, I have 2 different threads, and I have 2 different threads mainly to demonstrate to you so it's not confusing. I have the thread that's actually going to be the base of the garland, and then I have a yarn, like a woolen yarn, that's going to tether the flower heads to the main strand, the main string. You can use jute for this, you can use yarn for this, you can use cotton string. The very traditional thing that was used for making the garlands for both threads was actually something that came from the banana plant. It's called Naar, N-A-A-R, and it was from taking the husk off of the trunk of a banana tree, like so the husk grows and then the leaf comes out, and they would take off that husk and it gets sort of stripped into tiny little strips that are very strong. So those little strips would get dried, and then those long, thin strips of that banana tree, that's what was used to make the garlands. So this traditionally is very compostable, and I just think that's wonderful. I, for the life of me, could not find Naar when I went to Sri Lanka. So if anyone out there, this is my plea. If anyone out there knows where to get some Naar, please send it to P.O. Box 231532, New York, New York 10023, and I would be very grateful because I really will use it. So, in the absence of that wonderful banana tree stuff, I'm using cotton thread, and I am taking a length of thread that is going to be one side of the garland. So I'm making this garland for Saraswati, and I know that I would like the garland one side to be roughly this long. It's always better to have more string than less, so I'm going to add some string. And because I'm making 2 sides, I'm going to cut the other side right now. just so that I have both pieces and they're equal length. Okay, so I have my 2 strands for the base. I'm going to put that one aside, and I'm going to work with this one. Now, I'm going to use this red yarn just so that you could really see it, because the important part of this is how the flowers get affixed to this white thread. And really, when you're tying the flowers onto the main string, you do want to use something that's soft. So if you used something that was plastic, or if you used like a really strong string, when you pull it, and you do have to pull it to anchor the flower to the thread, if this is too strong and if it doesn't have some give to it, like this is pure wool and it has some bounce, so it's kind of elastic. But if it doesn't have that, it will cut through this stem and the flower will just fall off. So that is an important thing to keep in mind, that this, it's good to do, you can do the whole thing with just wool. So I tie these together and I give myself some plain string that will be used to tie the garland together at the back. And now, and I'm going to cut this actually to a length that is longer than the white thread, like 1.5 times as long. And now this is the most important part of how to make the garland. It's how you affix the flower heads to the thread, and this is what took me some time to learn. You place the flower, I'm going to move these actually so that you can really see from the overhead what I'm doing. Also, the more you touch these flowers, the more they'll brown and they'll wilt, so try not to touch them too much. And if you pick them up gently, don't squeeze them. Okay, what you do is you hold the stem perpendicular to the white thread. And then you take the wool, you go over the stem, and then around it and under the white thread, and you pull up. And that is locked into place. And now you turn this and you put the next flower head adjacent to the first one, and you do the same thing. So this is crisscrossing over. This stem is crossing over this one. I go over the stem, underneath the white thread again, and I pull up. And now I have one this way and one this way. And what I'm going to create is a little square of flowers. So this is going to be a rectangular prism. And it really helps that the flowers are the same size. So the next one goes here. So I pull my white thread and I anchor this stem to the white thread. I go over the stem, around, underneath. Now I'm going underneath 2 stems. I pull up, and you have to hold this taut so that it's really going to hold the flower head in place. And I tell you, the first time I did this, it was very frustrating because everything was crooked and everything was just falling out. That's okay. Let it fall out. It's just string and stems. Try it again, and you try it over and over again until you get it. And now the last flower head that goes in here to create that square goes here. So I put this here, I hold the stem onto the white thread, I go over, under the stem, and I pull it through. And this is now held in place. Okay. If you line the flowers up with the previous row, then your garland will be very neat. That might not happen the first time or the first few times. It's something that as you get better and better at this, if you want to do this and you keep trying, that you can pay attention to. You can refine your technique. So I'm lining that 5th flower up with the very first flower that I tied, and I tie it in place, and then I rotate. And this one gets lined up with the one from the previous row. And when I went to India and Sri Lanka, and I would go to the temple, I would see people, both men and women, standing outside the temple, tying flower garlands like this. And they would be selling them. But it was beautiful to see how fast they could do this. This is what they did for a living every day. They made flower garlands for sale. Okay, so it grows very quickly, and it's really beautiful seeing this come to life. Now, you can decide how to use the different colors that you've cut. So if you want to stop here with the light purple and add white, or maybe just one round of white, you can do that. Or you can make three solid chunks of color. The stems that are sticking out will get trimmed away later. So I've come to the end of one side of the garland because this is long enough for that statue, and I've just tied a knot at the end of the top of it. So I'm going to set this aside and I'm going to do the other half. And I set this aside close by because I'm going to use this as my guide of the color sequences that I'm going to recreate for the other side. These stems you can trim away. Okay, I'm going to do the other side. So I have my main thread, and I have the thread that I'm going to use to anchor the stem of the flower to the main thread. So I hold the stem perpendicular to the main thread, and then I take this thread, I go over the flower stem, so it's like that, and then under the stem and under the white thread, and I pull it out over here on this side of the stem. And then I pull it straight, I pull this red thread straight up, and that is what latches the flower stem in place. And you have to hold on to it tightly. So now, you have to hold this taut, otherwise the flower will fall out. So it's held taut and then turned perpendicular, and when it's turned perpendicular, the following stem gets placed adjacent to the first flower stem. So this, I'm trying to keep everything taut and show you, goes here, and now both threads are splayed open. This gets pressed onto the white thread, it goes over and then under the new stem and around, and it comes up. And now both are anchored in place. But I have to keep holding this taut and keep the tension on it, otherwise it'll become loose and these flowers will just fall out. So while I'm holding it taut, I turn it again. I put the third flower on, and I'm pressing down with my thumb. That's why it's really hard to see this. I have to push my thumb down to anchor that stem in between these two threads, and then the red goes around the stem, under the stem, and under the white thread, and back over to lock it in place. Okay? Then the fourth flower goes on. And this might be admittedly very hard for me to show you through video. Whenever I've shown anybody, and I've only shown I've only shown one person how to do this. No, I've shown two people. I showed Laura. Laura was very good at picking this up, and I showed my younger sister, Tasha, and she sat beside me and watched. So I hope this is discernible. But if it's not, go find a Hindu relative to show you. Go to the temple. Go to the Hindu temple and ask them to recommend a person to show you how to make flower garlands. And that's how you'll learn. You'll sit next to someone who knows how to do this, and you'll do it with them. Okay? So, I check. At this point, I'm going to hold this up to this one and see if I need to keep going with the light purple. And I need to do one more row of light purple in order for it to match the first one that I did. And round that early laureled head they flocked to gaze the senseless dead, and found unwithered on his curls a garland briefer than a girl's. There, now I'm going to switch to white. Just outside of Toronto, in a suburb called Richmond Hill, there was a Hindu temple built when I was 2 years old, and we have photos in my family album of me being a little boy walking around the foundation of the temple with my parents. And I remember going to that temple as a little kid and looking up at this big 8-foot tall statue of Vishnu. And I saw that Vishnu regularly while I was a kid. And then I moved away. First I moved to Munich. I lived in Munich for 2 years, and then I moved here, and I've lived here for 10 years. And for the last few years, I've gone back to Richmond Hill on New Year's Day. I go back to Toronto to visit my family for the holidays, and on New Year's Day, I've made it a new tradition of mine to make a garland on New Year's Eve, a big garland, and then on New Year's Day, I get up early and I go to the temple and I give the garland to the priests, and everybody sits down and watches this big tall statue of Vishnu bathed in milk and honey and turmeric. And it's very moving to see this black statue covered in white and then yellow. Ancient. And then they pull the curtain and they dress the statue in silks and gold jewelry. And then when they open the curtain, he's wearing all these flowers. He's just nestled in flower garlands. And when I see my flower garland on Vishnu, I just think that is the same Vishnu that I looked at as a child. And that is the same Vishnu that all of my relatives, when they were married in Toronto, they would trek up to Richmond Hill and they would stand in front of that same statue. And it is beyond anything religious. It's just a wonderful sense of tradition. I love it. Okay, back to purple. In the Hindu marriage tradition, when the bride and groom, when they're married, they exchange garlands. So they have like 4 garlands, and the bride puts a garland on the groom puts a garland on the bride, then the bride puts another one on the groom, and the groom puts another one on the bride, and then the bride takes the one that's on herself and puts it back onto the groom. There's this switcheroo dance of garlands that's really beautiful. The Hindu wedding is so colorful. The clothing, the fruit, the coconuts, the flower garlands. It's a very beautiful spectacle. Okay, and now back to white. So this is yet another one of those things that it doesn't last forever, maybe just a couple of days. It's beautiful when it's made, and then it starts to wilt. And that is life. Okay, so this is the last little white bit that I'm making. And I have not used all my flowers because I measured and I realized if I used all these flowers, it would be too long for that statue. So these flowers, traditionally, if I was making this garland for the temple, I would take these flowers in a bag to the temple and they would use them in their ritual. Let's see, one more row of white. So my thumb is constantly holding down the previous flower head, because if I let go, then the knot that I made would be loose and the flower would fall out. And when you're doing this, you really want to pick flower heads that are fresh, that aren't going to fall apart. I'm rushing a little here for the sake of time, but really you want to pick only the fresh flower heads, not the wilted, withered brown ones, or not ones that are falling apart. Okay, I think that's good. I'm going to just do one last check. See? There. So both of these look pretty similar. I'm going to make a knot around the last flower head so everything gets anchored in place. And now I'll just trim off the ends of these stems, which really should have been cut shorter to begin with so that they weren't sticking out as much. Okay. And now you can decide what ends up and what ends down. And I think that when I'm looking at this, so this can be the bottom of the garland or this can be the bottom. And I like that it's kind of swelling at the bottom here. So I'm going to make this the center, the bottom of the garland. And I'm going to tie these two together here. Some people also know how to make tassels that go at the bottom of the garland. And I have started making these tassels. Kunjum. I don't know exactly what the Tamil word is. It's something like that. It's a little beautiful flower tassel. So now, this is the exciting part, is putting the garland onto the statue. Okay, I think, nope, I've decided it's not going to go that way. It's going to go the other way. You know what happens when I put the flower garland on her? I always notice that she's smiling more. Her face changes. And because I've reversed this, I'm going to snip these off. There. How to make a Hindu flower garland. This was not as clear as I thought it was going to be, but I hope you enjoyed watching me make my garland. Something I really enjoyed doing.